The wilderness has a way of watching you that feels less like nature and more like a physical weight against the back of your neck. People talk about the great outdoors as if it is a playground, a place to find yourself among the cathedral of trees and the rushing mountain streams. But I have spent too many years looking at the maps where the ink just stops, where the names of the missing are written in the margins of reports that nobody wants to sign. There is a coldness in the Roosevelt National Forest that has nothing to do with the altitude or the coming winter. It is the kind of cold that settles in your marrow when you realize that a 3-year-old boy can vanish into a sliver of time so thin it should not exist. The forest does not just take, it erases, leaving behind a vacuum where a human life used to be. You can feel it in the way the wind whistles through the jagged granite peaks, a sound like a low morning moan that never quite reaches a crescendo. It was the 2nd of October, 1999. The air in the Comanche Peak wilderness was crisp, the kind of day where the sky is a blue so sharp it almost hurts to look at it. A group of 11 adults from a Christian hikers club were making their way along the Big South Trail, a rugged path that snakes through the dense timber and jagged granite of northern Colorado. Among them was Jaryd Atadero and his 2 children, 6-year-old Jocelyn and 3-year-old Jaryd. It was a day that should have been forgotten. Just another Saturday in the high country, where the only thing on the agenda was the steady rhythm of boots against packed earth. But the mountains have a memory that is longer than ours, and far more cruel. The group of 11 adults was moving at a casual pace, the kind of slow, rhythmic stride that lulls you into a false sense of security. Jaryd Atadero was a father who knew these woods. He was not a man of negligence. He was a man who trusted the collective eyes of a dozen friends. But the eyes of man are weak things when the forest decides to blink. Jaryd was a little boy with a big spirit. He wanted to be at the front of the pack, leading the way like a tiny explorer in a blue pullover and tan pants. He ran ahead just a few yards to talk to 2 fishermen near the riverbank. Men who saw him, spoke to him, and watched him turn back toward the trail. He was right there, within a stone throw of the group. And then he turned a corner around a cluster of jagged granite boulders, and the world simply closed its mouth. The silence that followed was not the peaceful quiet of the wilderness. It was a heavy, pressurized void that seemed to swallow the very sound of the rushing Poudre River. Jaryd called out for his son, expecting a giggle or the crunch of small sneakers on dry pine needles. There was nothing. Just the wind scraping against the bark of the ponderosa pines and the distant, rhythmic thud of his own heart. The group began to fan out, their voices rising in pitch as the realization began to set in. You have to understand the geography of the Big South Trail to realize how impossible this was. On one side you have the churning water, on the other, a steep, unforgiving incline of rock and thick brush. A 3-year-old boy does not simply vaporize in the span of 90 seconds. Yet that is exactly what the record shows. By the time the sun began to dip behind the peaks of the Mummy Range, the air turned from crisp to lethal, and the first wave of searchers was already feeling the weight of the mountain pressing down on them. I have looked at the search logs from those first 48 hours, and they read like a descent into a fever dream. More than 50 people arrived that first night, followed by hundreds more, including specialized mountain rescue teams and bloodhounds that were supposed to be the best in the country. The dogs are what haunt me the most. When they were brought to the last known point where Jaryd was seen, they did not catch a scent and lose it. They simply refused to work. They paced in circles, whining, their tails tucked between their legs as if they were smelling something that did not belong in the natural order of things. One of the handlers mentioned a scent wall, an invisible boundary that the animals would not cross. It is a recurring theme in these cases. A moment where the biological tools we rely on suddenly fail, leaving us blind in a landscape that sees perfectly well in the dark. The searchers climbed through crevices and searched every hollow log. But it was as if Jaryd had never existed at all. As the days bled into a week, the weather turned. A brutal storm rolled in, dumping snow and freezing rain onto the rugged terrain, effectively ending any hope of finding a 3-year-old alive. The search was eventually scaled back, then called off. leaving Jaryd Atadero to walk back out of those woods with empty arms and a hole in his soul that no amount of prayer could fill. For nearly 4 years, the Comanche Peak wilderness kept its secret. People talked about mountain lions. They talked about abductions. They whispered about things much darker that dwell in the places where the light does not reach. But the truth, or at least a piece of it, would not emerge until 2 hikers wandered off the trail in May of 2003. They were not looking for a lost boy. They were just trying to navigate a steep, technical slope more than 500 feet above the trail where Jaryd had vanished. What they found was a scene that defied every law of physics and predatory behavior. On a narrow, precarious ledge, they spotted a single, tiny white sneaker. It was sitting there, upright, as if it had been placed by a hand. Nearby was a pair of pants, inside out, and a scrap of a blue fleece pullover. There was no blood, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of the violent tearing that occurs when a predator like a mountain lion makes a kill. But the most unsettling detail was the condition of the clothing. Despite being exposed to the brutal Colorado winters for nearly 4 years, the clothes were remarkably well preserved. The white sneakers were still white, not yellowed by the sun or stained by the tannins of the forest floor. It was as if they had been kept in a vacuum. Or perhaps in a place where time moves differently, only to be deposited back onto the mountain years later. When the investigators finally reached the site, they found a fragment of a skull and a single tooth. That was all that remained of Jaryd Atadero. The official theory was that a mountain lion had snatched the boy and carried him up the mountain. But the experts who know these cats began to poke holes in that story immediately. A mountain lion is a drag predator. It kills and then pulls its prey into heavy brush to hide it. It does not carry a 30-pound child 500 feet up a near vertical cliff face without leaving a single drop of blood or a tuft of hair on the jagged rocks. And it certainly does not carefully undress its prey, turning the pants inside out in the process. The placement of the remains felt less like a kill site and more like a display. A grim collection of items returned to the world of the living by something that was finished with them. I have walked sections of that trail, and I have stood at the base of the incline where those clothes were found. It is a climb that would exhaust a fit adult. A labyrinth of scree and tangled roots that seems designed to repel anything with 2 legs. To suggest that a 3-year-old boy climbed that height on his own, in the middle of a disappearance window of less than 3 minutes, is a fantasy. It is a story we tell ourselves because the alternative is too terrifying to vocalize. We want to believe in mountain lions because we know how to hunt mountain lions. We do not know how to hunt a shadow. We do not know how to track something that can move a human body through the canopy or through the very air itself without leaving a footprint. There is a cold, clinical precision to the way Jaryd was taken and the way he was returned, a methodology that suggests an intelligence we are not equipped to understand. The more you look at these maps, the more you see the clusters. The Roosevelt National Forest is a beautiful place, but it is also a graveyard of the unexplained. There are points on the map where the laws of probability simply break down. We see the same patterns repeating. The proximity to water, the sudden onset of bad weather, the failure of tracking dogs, and the eventual discovery of remains in high, inaccessible places that the original searchers had already cleared. It is as if the forest is a giant machine, and every once in a while, a gear turns and someone gets caught in the teeth. Jaryd Atadero still seeks answers. But the mountain is a silent witness, and it does not offer depositions. He lives with the knowledge that his son was there 1 second and gone the next. Snatched from the fabric of reality in a place where 11 people were watching, there is a visceral horror in the thought of being the last person to see someone alive. The 2 fishermen who spoke to Jaryd carried that weight for years, wondering if they had seen the shadow behind him, if they had felt the shift in the air. They described the boy as happy, full of life. Just a kid being a kid in the sunshine. They did not hear a scream. They did not hear the brush break. They just saw him walk away into a pocket of the woods that apparently has no exit. When we talk about the missing, we often focus on the search, the logistics, the numbers, but we forget the sensory experience of the silence. The way the woods feel when you realize you are truly alone, even when you are surrounded by friends. It is a predatory stillness that settles over the landscape. A feeling that the trees are not just trees, but observers waiting for you to look away. I often think about the sneakers, those tiny, white sneakers sitting on a ledge in the middle of nowhere. To me, they are a message. They are the forest showing us that it can take what it wants and return it whenever it pleases. And there is absolutely nothing we can do to stop it. We build our trails, and we put up our signs, and we think we have conquered the wild. But the wild is just waiting for us to make a mistake. It is waiting for us to trust the group, to trust the daylight, to trust the 3 minutes it takes for a child to turn a corner. The case of Jaryd Atadero is not just a tragedy. It is a warning. It tells us that there are places in this world where the map is just a piece of paper and the rules of the civilized world do not apply. The investigators will tell you it was a predator. The skeptics will tell you it was an accident. But if you sit in the silence of the Comanche Peak wilderness long enough, you will feel the weight of a different truth. You will feel the eyes that do not blink. And you will hear the wind whistling through the granite in a way that sounds suspiciously like a name being whispered. We are guests in these mountains. And sometimes, the host decides it is time for us to leave, or stay forever. The ink on the reports may be dry, but the questions remain as sharp as the shards of granite that hold Jaryd's secrets. We are left to wander the margins, looking for patterns in the chaos, hoping that the next time the forest blinks, it is not our child standing on the edge of the void. The pattern is not isolated to Colorado. In 1958, a boy named Bobby Bizup vanished from a Catholic summer camp in the Rocky Mountains under nearly identical circumstances. He was there one moment, gone the next, and his remains were later found in a high, rocky area that defied the logic of his physical abilities. Much like Jaryd, the clothing and the location suggested a journey that a young child simply could not make. In the mountains of Oregon, the case of Samuel Bulkey echoes the same haunting notes. A sudden disappearance in a high-elevation park where the terrain is rugged and the answers are non-existent. These are not coincidences. They are chapters in a book we are still trying to learn how to read. The forest does not give back what it takes without a price. And the price is usually our peace of mind. We walk the trails and we look at the trees, but we never truly know what is looking back at us from the shadows of the Big South Trail.